ma'am. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Bill, please remain seated, and counsel, when you're ready, please approach the bench. Very much. We'll be with you again. Okay, and if we'll bring in our next witness. I'm sorry, you had said witness, I said witness, next potential juror. Were you looking at your watch because you wanted a recess, or you were just looking at your watch?
Looking at my watch and realizing it's probably not time for a recess yet, is it?
Do you want to wait till after this potential juror? Okay.
B86,
Please be seated. Good afternoon. You're going to be referred to as B86 instead of your name, and at this time we're having the attorneys ask questions about the questionnaire that you had filled out yesterday. With that, Mr. De La Ronda, you may proceed.
Please, the court. Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Bernie De La Ronda. I'm going to be asking you a series of questions just limited to the publicity aspect of it that you mentioned. You mentioned that you obtained some information, as you noted in your questionnaire here that you wrote, and you said from TV, newspaper, and conversations at work.
Yes, sir.
Is that the gist of where you got your information?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's talk first about that first part. TV, was it local and national, or local or national, or
Channel 13.
I'm sorry.
Channel 13.
Channel 13, local channel. Okay. And do you recall when you gathered that information, was that at the early stages, meaning back when it happened back in February of last year? Was it recently, or did you kind of follow along as every time it appeared?
It's kind of hard not to follow. It's everywhere. I didn't focus on it, but it's hard not to hear about it.
Right. So you would have heard about it at the beginning?
Yes, sir.
Is that correct?
Yes,
and then
sir.
any time it appeared on TV, you would have, just by routine, watching the news, you would have heard it?
Yes, and my children talked about it since they're about
Okay.
their age.
All right. And then you mentioned the newspaper. Would that be the local paper?
Yes.
And that would be the Orlando Sentinel? Or
Yes,
the, okay. And was that the actual hard copy of the newspaper or the online edition?
The delivery.
Okay, it comes to your, okay. And then any national news at all, like Fox or CNN, none of that stuff?
No, sir.
Okay. Then you mentioned conversations at work, and we obviously, you put where you work, and that's a school here, and not specifically about maybe the school,
Right.
but just a school here. And was that with fellow teachers there at school, or?
Well, I'm in the front office, I'm not a teacher.
Okay, but I'm saying, did you interact with the principal or the teachers, or how, what conversations? Or other people that are employed there in the front office?
Both.
Okay. Let's talk then about the latter first. In terms of at work, what, if any, comments did you hear at work about the case in terms of facts or opinions, that kind of stuff?
Okay, let me focus a second.
Whatever you remember, we don't expect you to walk in here and
Most
have
of it's just
everything-
been recently talking about how the media blows things out of proportion.
I'm sorry.
Most of it was recently talking about how the media blows things out of proportion.
Okay. And were there different people stating that the media blows things out of proportion?
Yes,
Okay. Did you agree with those comments?
yes.
Okay. And aside from hearing it there at work where the fellow employees talked about the media blowing it, did you come to that conclusion before you heard that?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about that. I gather from watching it on TV and what you've read in the paper, you felt the media has blown things out of proportion?
They always do.
I'm sorry, what?
They always do.
They always do. Okay.
They sensationalize a lot of stuff. I
Okay.
don't pay attention to a lot of it.
So I gather, are you of the opinion or the mindset that what is necessarily reported in the news is not accurate?
Oh, yes.
I mean, is there any dispute in your mind about that? Okay, you're shaking your head like there's no dispute, correct?
None.
Did you have that opinion about the media prior to this case?
Oh, yes. Many years.
Any news?
Many years, yes.
For many years?
For many years, yes.
Now, you mentioned, and I don't know if you did, I apologize, I know you don't have it in your notated here in your questionnaire, but did you have discussions with your family members about the case?
Just my sons.
Okay. And you have, I'm assuming, at least two sons, right?
I have two sons, 20 and
Okay.
21.
How old are they?
My youngest is 20, and I have a 21-year-old.
And you don't have to name it, just, okay. You have a son that's how old?
20,
And then your other one is?
21.
Okay. And do they live here in Zimmerman County too?
One still lives with me, one is just home for the summer from college.
Okay. And did you have discussions with both of them?
The older one mostly, the younger one's
Okay.
pretty quiet.
The one that was in college, you had
Yes.
discussions with? And if best you can recall, what did you all talk about in terms of the facts of the case?
They made fun of the fact of the Skittles.
They made fun of the Skittles, or your sons did?
Yes.
And did you agree with them, or you just kind of took it all in?
I just for them.
Okay, and when you say they made fun, and I apologize for putting you on the spot, but when you say they made fun, like it was Skittles, or the young man was shot because of Skittles, or
He
just it
got
was candy, was it just kind of,
It was just
you can't believe it's candy, that kind of stuff?
Something like that, I don't really
Okay.
remember.
Anything else you can remember about the Skittles, or your discussions with your son or sons about it?
Not really.
Okay. Now, I've got here on your notated in terms of facts that you've got here, George Zimmerman followed Trayvon Martin in his neighborhood, was told by police not to do that, phone went dead, and also Trayvon Martin was shot in a struggle. And that you've seen photos of George Zimmerman after the fight. Is that what best you can recall? And I know that Monday morning when you wrote this, that as best you can recall what the facts were?
That's pretty much what's been in the paper lately.
What's been in the paper lately?
Yes, and-
Okay, all right. Let me, if I could, as best you can, try to remember, if you can, when you first heard about it. What did you first hear about it, if you can remember at this time when you first heard about the case?
When I first heard about it?
Yeah, well, not when, and I'm assuming it's close in time to February of last year.
Yes.
What you first recall hearing about the case? And if you can't remember, that's perfectly all right. I'm not trying to get you to think of something that, I don't want you to speculate.
I just, no, I
Yes.
just remember them talking about as somebody that had gone to the store. I don't really remember much, no.
Okay. And since February of last year till now, recently, have you kept up with, I know you watch the news, Channel 13, but have you kept up with the proceedings that have occurred in court in terms of rulings from the court or stuff going on?
No.
Is that a no?
No, not actually until I got the summons.
Until you got summons, okay. Now, when you got summons, did you do some research?
Not research, but I paid more attention
Okay.
to the news or the
So-
paper.
And I believe the summons would have gone out like 3 or 4 weeks ago, or was it more recent?
Approximately.
Okay. Did you then start paying attention to what was going on in court?
I didn't, just what was on Channel 13 or in the paper. I
Okay.
didn't sit and watch
Sure.
the TV.
I gather when you got that summons, you didn't know it was going to be for this particular
Not
case?
till I heard it on the news. And I
Okay,
was
so you
okay.
were one of potential, however many there were, right?
Right.
Okay. And you started paying attention. Now, what do you recall after you got the summons occurring in court? If you can, remember what you heard.
In court, I didn't pay attention to that.
At all?
Only what was on Channel 13 that they, just the highlights.
Okay. At this time, do you remember any of those highlights at all?
I just remember them showing the pictures of George Zimmerman, what he looked like, that they didn't show for months later.
Okay, and what did that picture look like, as best you can recall?
It looked like he had a broken nose and
Okay.
swollen, and they showed the back of his head bleeding. And
Okay. And what was did you have impressions when you saw that?
impressions.
Yeah, did you have an opinion as a result of seeing that?
I'm sure something severe happened.
Okay, and did you come to any conclusions as a result of that? And the reason I ask because you stated in terms of you have not formed an opinion as to the guilt or innocence of this defendant, is that
Right.
correct? Did that, watching or seeing that photograph sway you one way or the other regarding that?
I work in a middle school. I understand.
And please don't tell us the school it is,
No,
unless
I
you want
won't.
to.
Discipline. Part of my job is making sure all the information in a computer is accurate. So obviously it takes two to get to where that situation was. For me to figure out, I had no opinion either way, but obviously something traumatic happened on both sides.
Okay, so you keep an open mind as to what actually happened, is that correct? And so is it your belief now that you can keep an open mind in terms of relying on the evidence that actually comes out of this courtroom and making your decision?
I would think so.
Okay, are you leaning one way or the other this time, or you have not formed an opinion at all?
Lots of opinions, but not one way or the other.
I'm sorry.
Lots of opinions, but not one way or the
Well,
other.
tell me a little bit about those opinions that you had when you said you have lots of opinions. Everybody has opinions, obviously. And the question is, can you set this aside? And you said you have, but I'm curious right now as to what opinions you have formed as a result of what you saw on TV. And then let me prod you if I could, just to get to the point, because you stated that you saw the picture of Mr. Zimmerman, correct? Did you ever see any pictures of Trayvon Martin
From that time or just recently?
recently?
Just recently, yes.
You did, okay. And you also, did you see any other pictures about the case at all, other than that?
Nothing I can think of right now.
Okay. Did you, I apologize if I asked this already, you did not do your own research on the case, correct? You didn't go on the internet and try to get more information or just, Google whatever about the case. Did you listen to any of the commentary, even if it was local, Channel 13, where attorneys may have spoken about the case and made commentaries about the case?
The only thing recently was when you were talking about, it kept coming on and on, about the 911 call, the screaming in the background.
Okay, tell me if you can, what you recall hearing about that or seeing on TV about that.
Just that they were trying to decide if it was Trayvon Martin or not, and if they could distinguish who it was.
Okay. And I gather that that's as far as you got on that topic, is that correct?
I just thought because they did play it, and I just thought you couldn't tell.
Your opinion based on what you heard, okay, is that correct? Now, assuming you were to hear evidence about that or not hear evidence, I guess my question is, can you agree to rely on the evidence you actually hear in the courtroom if there is evidence about that? In other words, have you prejudged whether you can hear that or not, or whether that's relevant or not in terms of the recording as to who uttered something? Have you prejudged that, or can you keep an open mind as to what actually evidence is presented in the courtroom about that?
I could probably keep an open mind.
And you mentioned that you had seen photos. Is that the one you're talking about in your notation here? Is that correct? Okay. I gather, based on your commentary here, your notations here, that you had heard at some point the 911 tape. Is that correct? Where Mr. Zimmerman's calling the police. Is that what you're basing that on?
Well, I think I heard that one, but that was the one that the woman had.
Okay.
She was calling. She called 911.
I got you. So you heard both of them. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any doubt in your mind, as you sit here today, about whether your perceptions or consideration in terms of being fair, in terms of relying on what actually has in the news courtroom versus the media aspect of it? Let me rephrase that, make it
Thank you.
simple. In other words, you've heard about the media, you've heard publicity about this case, and I gather you're of the opinion that the media does not always get it right?
Correct.
Is that correct, or am I putting words in your mouth?
No, you're correct.
Okay. So I gather you're going to set that aside, or can you set that aside? Whatever you've seen on TV,
Yes, sir, I can say so.
you can. Is there any doubt about that? Do you have any dispute about that? Is that correct?
No,
Okay. May I have a moment?
Yes, you may.
And I apologize, I may have cut you off when you were talking about the opinions that you may have had some. Did I understand that correctly?
I was hoping you'd forget that. But you
I'm
didn't.
sorry, what?
I was hoping you'd forget that.
Okay, well, I've got a good man over here that reminded me, Mr. Guy. What do you recall in terms of your opinions? And I guess, let's make sure we understand where you're coming from there. Is that based on what you heard on the news, right? Or
The opinion of was basically regarding what I heard about Trayvon being up here because he was expelled from school.
Okay, all right. And did that make a bigger impression on you because you're also in school?
Probably.
Okay. Now, did you take that, what you saw in the news, did you take that as hardcore evidence? Oh, that is evidence and it's really true?
No, I took that as to be from a parent point of view.
Okay. So tell me what opinions you formulated as a result of hearing that.
That being a single parent with two boys of my own, I'm very strict with them. I don't want to judge, but I just want to say that this could have been prevented had he not been up here. That's all.
So your opinion was that perhaps if, assuming that's true that he got suspended, that this would have been prevented if he had not been here?
Right.
And not that you're passing judgment, but then did you feel, as you mentioned, you're a single parent, that if the parent had done something more as a result of that,
From what I
that
see in
young man would
school,
still be
kids
alive?
and parents and
okay. And is that based on just being a parent yourself and then also being
in the
involved in
situation I'm
school?
in, both.
Okay. Any other opinions that you formulated as a result of that, or any other topics? Now, that opinion you came to, which is, we all live in this great country, we're able to formulate the opinions. Did you have any further discussions about that with your sons?
Actually, no.
You did not. In other words, you didn't tell your kids, now, listen, this is what happens if you...
No, I've done that years ago. I don't do that
Okay,
much anymore.
all right.
That.
Do you think, since you formed that opinion, if you were to hear, assuming if she testified, Mr. Martin's mother, do you think that would sway you one way or the other? Would you automatically, when you heard her testimony, would you automatically, in the back of your mind, would that opinion pop into your mind and go, hold on, and would that impact you being able to be objective in evaluating whatever testimony, if she did testify, if she presented?
I would think so.
You think you could? Your first impression wouldn't automatically kick in and say, hold on,
I wouldn't say it wouldn't pop in my head, but
do you think you can set that aside? And you know, only you would know. And what we're trying to do here is be fair to both sides. And what we're asking, I guess, what I'm asking you specifically is if you were to hear from Trayvon Martin's mother, would you automatically, first said your impression when you first heard about it, would that pop in?
I would think it would pop in, but I don't.
Okay, and so let's assume it would pop into your mind. Do you think you can listen to what this lady would say? What I'm trying to figure out is whether that would in any way interfere, first of all, being able to hear, because sometimes people for opinion, they just tune the person out. They just kind of look the other way and just completely disregard what the witness says. That's number one. And number two is, even if you heard the person, you would still be thinking about your first impressions about that. Do you understand my question?
I'd like to think I could separate it.
You think you could? So the first thing is you think you could keep an open mind and listen to what that witness said? In other words, Trayvon Martin's mother said? Is that correct?
Yes.
And the second thing is, obviously, it pops in your mind, do you think you could automatically throw that out and base your decision only in evaluating her testimony on what she actually said on the witness stand as opposed to those first impressions you got, that first opinion you came to? And only you know.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. And so the question is, in being fair to both sides, that is the defendant and the state, you think you can do that? And this is the time to tell us. That's why we're asking you this.
I'm thinking I could.
Okay. So there's no dispute in your mind that you could just completely disregard your first impression. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And if you heard no evidence about, assuming there's a suspension, you can completely disregard that, like you had never heard about it? Or would that be harder for you to do? I gather by the way you're looking at me, that might be harder for you to get out of your mind?
That might be hard to get out of my mind.
Okay. And would it be fair to say that in some way you're not going to be able to get that out of your mind in terms of the case?
If it was to be presented as to,
Right. In other words, let's assume you sat there as a juror, you're picked and you're juror number 28 or whatever, juror number 2, and you heard the evidence, and there wasn't a single piece of evidence about Trayvon Martin being suspended. But in the back of your mind, it's there, you've heard it, you came to an opinion as a result of that. You think you could take that out?
I think so.
Okay. You hesitated a little bit earlier, and I'm not trying to pick on you, but am I correct in saying that you hesitated earlier? Now, and obviously you got a minute to think about it while I was formulating my next question. Why did you hesitate at first, and why are you positive now, or are you sure that you can set it aside?
Because I'm thinking.
And I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm sorry. That's why we get to ask you questions, and Mr. O'Mara or Mr. West, on behalf of the defense, will be able to ask you questions.
I'm just trying to do the best I can as far as.
We know you are.
And just try and go by whatever is said.
Right. So you believe at this time that you could just completely disregard that? What you had heard about the suspension, if that never came in, you could just completely disregard that. When you went back into the jury room to deliberate, you think you could form your opinion on actually the evidence you heard as opposed to something you may have heard earlier that in no way, assuming it's true first, even comes into evidence.
I can try.
And that's all we can do. As you sit here today, you think you could?
Probably.
Okay, now probably is like you're not sure. Right? Wouldn't you agree that probably means maybe?
I'm just thinking I'm human. I'm going to do the best I
Oh,
can.
we know you are,
I'm
ma'am.
gonna say
No,
yes,
no,
but I can't guarantee anything.
So you really can't guarantee as you sit here today that you could?
I can try.
Is that
That's what I can
fair?
say, yes.
Is that fair to say that at this time you really, there's things that we can say certainly in life, and then we sort of think, I'll try, I'll do my best, but I can't guarantee it. Would you be the latter?
Probably.
Okay, I appreciate you being so honest with us. All we're trying to do is really ask you these questions, and you're kind of putting on the spot. But we're both sides are trying to get a fair trial for each of our respective clients. We represent the people of the state of Florida. Trayvon Martin is the person that was shot in this case, and the defense represents George Zimmerman. But thank you very much for your answers.
Thank you. Imagine what it's like to be a witness or even a defendant. Why don't you take a deep breath for a second, because unfortunately I'm going to spend a minute or two on what you just went through. Okay? Judge Nelson is going to read you some instructions. And I'm not supposed to really paraphrase them for you. I'm not going to try to. I'm going to give you some general principles. And those are this: that we expect you to bring your common sense as a citizen who's called to be a juror, and to use that common sense in applying the law to the facts of the case. She tells you to do that. Can you do that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Another very important part that we are to focus on here today, and this is just part of voir dire, what we call a jury examination. There will be more. This particular part is just talking about what you knew about the case before you got here. And you've talked about a couple of things. As a premise, the judge is going to instruct you that the only way you can come back with a lawful verdict, one that can be trusted by all those who will hear it, is if you listen to her instructions and follow the law. And I think you said you can do that, right?
Yes, sir.
Part of those instructions are this. Though we're going to spend some time finding out what you know about the case, you have to agree that you will only base your verdict on what you hear here in the courtroom. Will you do that? The example that Mr. Del Rionda used was this question about, you had heard something about that Trayvon Martin might have been expelled. Do you understand that that may not even, that's the word she used. Could you?
Sorry, what's the objection?
Objection, I don't know that she used the word expelled, but.
Okay, she did.
Oh, I
You
think.
can continue on.
Sorry.
It's okay. You know, as you sit here today, that might not even be true, right? You don't, you just heard it on the radio? From the very same people who you said you don't know that if you really should believe them,
True.
right?
True.
That the media, I think your words were hype things up or something in that vein, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, would you agree that anything you may have heard, whether it is about Trayvon Martin or George Zimmerman, may not be true?
That's true.
And if you were to rely on that memory to the exclusion of the evidence that you hear in the courtroom, that would be improper for you to rely on that memory?
You're correct, I should.
And that though you may have heard a bunch of things about the case, if it came down to what you hear in the courtroom versus what you think you heard or might remember from outside the courtroom, which are you going to rely on in deciding your verdict?
What I hear in here.
I'm sorry?
What I hear in here.
Any question about that?
No.
Is that something that you'll just try to do, or is that something that you can in fact commit to do?
I can commit to that.
Right? I mean, the judge is going to tell you to do it, will you listen to her instructions?
Yes, sir.
And if there's a conflict in that evidence, you remember what we just talked about. And let's just say you don't hear any evidence at all about Trayvon Martin's past. All you know from the evidence is he was here in Seminole County. And you have to ignore anything else you may have heard about that, because it doesn't come from that witness stand, and you haven't heard in this courtroom. Can you do that?
Yes, sir.
Other things where you mentioned the 911 call, you mentioned the non-emergency call. We'll call them those two different things so we know what we're talking about here, okay? You may not hear those at all in the courtroom. You might, but you might not. Any concern leaving that outside the courtroom and determining what you need to decide this case upon only on what's in the courtroom?
No, sir.
You think that would be unfair of us to ask you to do that? To only ask and decide upon the case with what we tell you here in the courtroom? Yes? You okay with being a juror who can do that? Yes?
Yes, sir.
Now that we've both questioned you like a witness about it, do you have any question of us? Do you have any concern about being able to do just that? Act as a juror who will listen to the court's instructions, apply the law to the facts of the case, and then come up with a verdict? Will you carry, you have some, what we call it, skepticism with the media? Is that a nice, accurate term? Okay. Are you sort of skeptical by nature?
Probably lately.
I'm sorry?
Probably lately.
Okay. well, you've made it through the teenage years of a couple of sons, so
No, they weren't the problem.
that's not the problem?
No, the ex-husband was.
Nicely said. And we may even talk about that, but that probably doesn't have too much to do with pretrial publicity, does it? Okay. I'm going to talk a bit more. Any other concerns about the issue that Mr. Delaronda ended with and I started with about making sure that you don't infect what you hear in the trial with what you thought you heard outside?
And you
Right?
straightened it out.
Did I?
Yes, you did.
Okay. Anything else that needs to be cleared up on that issue? You okay with it? If you're a juror, you're going to leave all that stuff outside, just listen here today or during the trial? Okay, great. Now let's just talk about some of those other influences that you may have had from the media with whom you're quite skeptical. You defaulted, your TV is to channel 13, right?
Pretty much, yes.
I know that they've covered some of the hearings live, where we actually could sit here and watch us talk and the judge rule. Did you do any of that? Did you listen to any of the hearings? No? And I'm going to ask you, as Mr. Delaronda did, sometimes you shake your head and I know what you're saying, but Corey Porter is not allowed to interpret. She can only, that's okay. So you didn't watch any of that on TV?
No.
And you get some of your news from the Orlando Sentinel?
Yes.
And you said you get it delivered. Do you read it every day?
Scan.
Okay. I know, because I also read it, that they have had ongoing coverage of this case, actually for the past 16 months. Is there anything from your reading the Orlando Sentinel that if I asked you, tell me one thing you remember reading about, what would it be about this case?
Being sequestered.
Okay. So some self-interest shows up, huh? That's okay. Let's talk about that for a minute. You've read on the questionnaire that this trial could last 4 to 6 weeks, correct? Could be less, could be more, but that's our estimate as best we can tell. And there's also a possibility that you would be here not only for that period of time, but also that you could be sequestered. Decision we haven't made yet, but it could happen. Would that fact of having to do that in order to serve us as a juror, would that create such a hardship that you wouldn't be able to serve?
Not so much a hardship as that I only have my son for a couple of months, then he goes back to New York in August.
Any chance he's in the jury pool?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right, so that's certainly a concern, right? Do you think that is something that you will just, if we were to say, we understand your son's in town from college, but we really need you on the jury, and we pick you, let's just say we do it anyway, are you going to be so distracted because your son's at home and you're not spending time with him, such that you would not be a competent juror for us? Or would you be able to put that aside and still pay attention, focus, and be a good juror?
I think I can.
Okay. You know what happens when you say think I can instead of yes or no. So let's spend a couple of minutes, because if you can't, that's okay too. It's, your son's in town and he's
But
not
that's one
here.
of those questions that's hard to answer until you've been in it.
Sure. Okay. If you were sitting though as a juror, would you be able to pay full attention? So let's just say we start right now and your son just came home yesterday. Are you going to be so distracted so that it shouldn't serve? Or can you pay attention and give us that attention for the duration of the trial?
If it was sequestered, I would think I could have. But
Could
if it's
not?
not, I think I could.
Okay.
Judge, may I have a moment, please? Ready, Your Honor.
Great, thank you very much. I almost feel like I should have a few more questions to make the tape change worthwhile, but I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. If you'll remain seated for just one moment, counsel, when you're ready, please come up, approach the bench. We'll talk with you again soon, and if you'll please follow Corporal Demps outside the courtroom, and if you could bring in our next, oh, you wanted to take a recess. Okay, let's take a 10-minute recess. It's, okay, good time for the recess. Court will be in recess for 10 minutes.